The man who left Marion Hale with nothing came back begging for one thing: the papers she found inside the wall. 6 months earlier, Arthur Hale had walked out of divorce court smiling. After 38 years of marriage, he kept the house, the savings, the business, and the life Marion helped him build. What did he leave her? A dilapidated shack outside Marietta, Ohio. Broken windows, a sagging porch, rot in the walls, a door that barely locked. He called it worthless. He thought it would shame her. He thought a 64-year-old woman with no money, no home, and no one fully on her side would finally break. But Arthur made one mistake. He gave Marion the only place that still held the truth. Behind one rotting wall, she found a lockbox he never knew was there. And inside was proof that Arthur had started taking from her long before he ever asked for a divorce. Now he stood outside that same shack, his voice shaking. "Marion, please, don't do this. If you've ever seen a good woman get treated like she was nothing, don't let Marion disappear alone. Subscribe and stay with her. Because what she finds inside that shack doesn't just change her life, it exposes the man who thought he had erased her." Before Arthur Hale stood outside that shack, begging Marion not to expose him, he had spent years teaching her to doubt the value of her own life. Not with shouting, not with fists, with smaller things. A decision made without asking. A bank statement she never saw. A business folder moved from the kitchen drawer. A quiet correction at dinner when she spoke too freely. And because Marion had been married to him for 38 years, she had learned to call those things normal. Back when they first met, Arthur was not the man with lawyers, polished shoes, and a younger woman waiting in the hallway. He was a young contractor with a rented storage unit outside Marietta, Ohio, one old truck, and a flooring supply business that was always one late payment away from trouble. Marion was 26 then, sharp with numbers, careful with money, the kind of woman who could look at a stack of receipts and see where a whole month had gone wrong. She helped him after work, typing invoices at their kitchen table, calling customers who were late on payments, sorting supplier bills by due date, reminding Arthur which contractor owed him money and which one only made promises. Arthur used to smile then. He used to tell people, "Marion keeps this place from falling apart." And she believed him, because in those early years, he said it like praise. Then the business grew. One truck became 3. The storage unit became a warehouse. Arthur started wearing shirts with his company name stitched over the pocket. People in town began calling him a self-made man. Marion smiled when they said it. She did not correct them. By then, she had 2 children at home. Arthur's mother needing care, and a house that somehow became her full-time responsibility without anyone ever naming it work. Arthur said staying home made sense. Just for a while. That was the phrase. Just for a while. But a while became school lunches, doctor visits, parent-teacher meetings, grocery lists, client dinners, laundry before sunrise, and nights spent waiting for Arthur to come home too tired to hear about her day. Years passed that way. Not empty years. There were birthdays, Christmas mornings, Little League games, stormy nights when the power went out and the children slept on blankets in the living room. There had been laughter too. That was what made the betrayal harder. A bad marriage from the beginning is one kind of wound. A life with enough good memories to confuse you cuts differently. By the time Marion turned 64, Arthur no longer introduced her as the woman who helped him build anything. She was simply my wife. Then, slowly, even that began to sound like an inconvenience. He started coming home later. He kept his phone face down. He bought shirts Marion had never seen and cologne she had not chosen. When she asked if everything was all right, he said she worried too much. When she asked about money, he said the business was complicated. Then one afternoon, Marion noticed the old file box was gone from the hall closet. The one that used to hold tax papers, account statements, and business records from the early years. Arthur said he had moved it to the office. Just cleaning things up, he told her. But he did not look at her when he said it. 2 weeks later, while Marion folded towels warm from the dryer, Arthur stood in the laundry room doorway. He did not sit. He did not soften his voice. He simply said, "I want a divorce." The dryer kept turning behind her, round and round. A normal sound inside an impossible moment. There was another woman. Arthur did not deny it. Her name was Tessa. She was younger, bright, ambitious. He said she made him feel alive again. Alive. That word stayed with Marion, because for 38 years, she had been the one making sure his life worked. And now he was telling her she had become the reason it didn't. But Marion still did not know the worst part. Arthur had not only prepared to leave her heartbroken, he had prepared to leave her with almost nothing. And the first signs of that plan were already sitting in a lawyer's folder. The first sign that Arthur had prepared for war was not the divorce papers. It was his calm. Marion noticed it in the days after he left the laundry room and moved into the guest bedroom. He did not pace. He did not apologize. He did not seem confused by the damage he had caused. He moved through the house like a man following a list. The next morning, he changed the password on the home computer. By Friday, the joint credit card had a lower limit. By Monday, the business mail stopped coming to the house. When Marion asked why, Arthur said his attorney wanted things clean. Clean. That was the word he used for removing her from the life she had helped hold together. The divorce meetings felt cold from the beginning. Arthur arrived with 2 attorneys. One older man with silver hair and a gentle voice. One younger woman who barely looked at Marion except when reading numbers from a folder. Marion came with Claire Whitcomb, a practical attorney from town who had kind eyes and very little patience for performance. Claire was prepared, but Arthur's side came with binders. Marion came with memories. And memories do not look powerful on a conference table. They listed the house as Arthur's primary asset. They described the business as complicated, debt-heavy, and dependent on Arthur's active management. They said most of the accounts were tied to company obligations. They said Marion had not worked outside the home in decades. They said she had no operational role, no recent income, limited financial contribution. That phrase entered the room quietly and took the air out of Marion's chest. Limited financial contribution. No one mentioned the kitchen table where she once sorted invoices until midnight. No one mentioned the customers she called when Arthur was too angry to speak politely. No one mentioned the years she gave up because Arthur said the family needed her home. In that room, all of it became invisible. Arthur sat across from her with his hands folded. He did not smile. That would have been too obvious. But Marion knew his face. She knew the small tightening near his mouth when things were going his way. He was winning before the judge ever heard the case. The final hearing came on a gray morning in Washington County. Rain tapped against the courthouse windows. Marion wore a navy dress she had owned for 12 years. She had pressed it herself the night before because she could not afford to look broken. Arthur wore a charcoal suit. Tessa waited in the hallway, not inside the courtroom. Close enough to be seen. That was the kind of cruelty Arthur understood best. Not loud, not illegal, just placed where it would hurt. The judge reviewed the settlement. Arthur would keep the house. Arthur would keep the company. Arthur would keep the newer SUV. Arthur would retain most of the business-linked financial accounts based on disclosures already provided. Marion would receive support. Enough to survive, not enough to feel safe. Then Arthur's older attorney cleared his throat. There is one additional property. Marion looked up. Claire turned a page. The attorney described a small rural structure outside Marietta, near Mill Creek Road. It had belonged to Arthur's late father. It had been vacant for years. No reliable heat, poor roof, minimal resale value. A shack, really. Arthur was willing to transfer it to Marion. As a gesture of goodwill, the attorney said. Marion turned toward Arthur. This time, he smiled. Only a little, only enough for her. The message was clear. Here is what you are worth. A place nobody wants. A place that might collapse before winter. A place with your name on it only because I have no use for it. Claire leaned closer. It is still property, she whispered. It gives you somewhere to start. Somewhere to start. Marion looked down at her hands. They were steady. That surprised her. I'll take it, she said. Arthur's smile shifted. For the first time that morning, irritation crossed his face. Maybe he expected tears. Maybe he expected refusal. Maybe he wanted her to beg for something better. The judge approved the final order. Just like that, 38 years became signatures. In the hallway, Marion walked past Tessa without looking at her. Arthur's voice followed softly. Enjoy the shack, Marion. Try not to let it fall on you. Tessa laughed under her breath. Marion kept walking. But outside, under the courthouse awning, she stopped. The deed was in her folder. Her marriage was over. Her home was gone. And Arthur believed he had just handed her the final proof that she was finished. But the shack waiting at the end of Mill Creek Road was not empty. Not the way Arthur thought. And before Marion ever found the lockbox, she would have to survive the first night inside it. Before Marion found what Arthur feared most, she had to meet the place he thought would break her. Mill Creek Road narrowed after the last gas station outside Marietta. The pavement gave way to gravel. Then the gravel thinned into two muddy tracks pressed between weeds and low branches. Marion drove slowly, both hands tight on the wheel, listening as brush scraped the sides of her old sedan. Everything she owned was behind her. 2 suitcases, 3 cardboard boxes, a lamp wrapped in a towel, a plastic bin of kitchen things, and the courthouse folder on the passenger seat, with the deed inside. The road bent near a rusted mailbox with no flag. That was where she saw it. The shack sat back from the road like something left behind on purpose. The roof sagged in the middle. One window was cracked from corner to corner. Another had plywood nailed over it. The porch leaned slightly to one side, and dead leaves had gathered in wet piles along the steps. Marion turned off the engine. For a while, she did not move. The silence felt too large. No traffic, no nearby voices, just wind in the trees, and the low ticking sound of her cooling engine. Arthur had called it worthless. Now Marion understood why. It did not look like a home. It looked like a sentence. She stepped out, and the ground sank under her shoes. Mud pulled at the soles as she walked toward the porch. The first step groaned. Marion froze. Then she placed her weight carefully and climbed. The front door stuck when she pushed it. She tried again, harder this time. The swollen frame scraped against the floor before the door opened halfway. The smell reached her first. Mold, old dust, mouse droppings, wet wood, a sour, closed-up odor that made her turn her face away. She stood in the doorway with one hand over her mouth. Inside was one main room with a small kitchen area at the back, a rusted sink, a cracked mirror, a narrow counter stained dark from years of damp. The old wood stove sat in the corner like it had not been touched in a decade. Leaves had blown in through the broken window. Water stains spread across the ceiling. The floor dipped near the middle. Marion took one step inside, then another. The boards complained under her feet. She thought of the house Arthur kept. The warm kitchen, the hallway photographs, the dining table where she had served Thanksgiving dinner for years. Then she looked at the shack again. This was what he believed she deserved. A place that smelled forgotten. A place barely standing. A place he could laugh about while driving back to the life he had kept. Her phone had one bar. She could call her daughter. She could call her son. Both had offered space. Carefully. Kindly. Temporarily. A guest room. A basement room. A few weeks until she figured things out. Marion loved them too much to resent them. But she was tired of being placed somewhere with an expiration date. So she put the phone back in her coat pocket. That first evening, she did not try to fix the shack. She only tried to claim one clean corner. She dragged a broken chair outside, swept leaves from the floor, wiped down a small patch near the wall with paper towels and bottled water. Then she laid one blanket there. One blanket, one suitcase, one lamp with no outlet to plug into yet. That was all. But even that little corner felt like a decision. Night came fast. The cold came faster. Wind slipped through the boards and moved the plastic she had taped over the window. Something scratched inside the ceiling. Rain began near midnight. Soft at first. Then, steady enough to drip into the pot, she placed beneath the leak. Marion lay fully dressed beneath 2 coats. Her knees ached. Her back hurt. Her eyes burned from the smell, and from everything she had refused to cry in front of Arthur. In the dark, she whispered the only sentence she could hold on to. I am still here. Not loudly, not bravely, just enough to hear herself say it. By morning, the shack looked worse in daylight. The dirt was clearer. The walls were worse. The ceiling stain had spread around the leak like an old bruise. But daylight did something else too. It made the place less like a nightmare and more like work. Marion drove into town and bought gloves, bleach, trash bags, duct tape, A broom, bottled water, and a cheap battery lantern. The cashier glanced at the pile. Rough project? Marion paused. Rougher than I expected. The woman did not pry. She only slid the receipt across the counter and said, "Start small." So Marion did. She cleaned the counter, then one shelf, then the corner near the stove. She filled bag after bag with trash Arthur would never see her carry. By late afternoon, the first clean corner had become 2, then 3. The shack was still broken, but it was no longer untouched. That evening, while pulling a warped shelf loose from the back kitchen wall, Marion noticed something strange. The boards behind it did not match the rest. They were narrower, older, set unevenly, as if someone had covered that section in a hurry. There was even a thin line of dried caulk along one edge. Too neat for a wall this neglected. Marion tapped one board with the handle of her screwdriver. Solid. She tapped the next. Hollow. She stood very still, then tapped again. For the first time since Arthur handed her that deed, the shack did not feel empty. It felt like it was hiding something. Marion did not open the wall that night. She wanted to. Her hand stayed around the screwdriver longer than it should have, her thumb resting against the worn handle, her eyes fixed on the mismatched boards near the old sink. But something about that hollow sound made her careful. It did not feel like loose wood. It felt deliberate. And after what Arthur had done, Marion had learned that deliberate things could be dangerous. So she backed away. She left the warped shelf on the floor. Then she pulled the small table in front of the wall, as if an old table could guard a secret she did not understand yet. That night, she did not sleep well. The rain had stopped, but the shack kept making noises. A soft creak in the roof, a shift in the floor, the thin plastic over the window breathing in and out with the wind. But beneath all of it, Marion kept hearing the tap of the screwdriver. Solid, hollow, solid, hollow. By morning, the air inside the shack was cold enough to make her fingers stiff. She made instant coffee on the camp stove and drank it standing up, still looking toward the back wall. Part of her wanted to ignore it. A woman can only survive so many surprises before even curiosity starts to feel like a threat. But the wall had changed the room. Yesterday, it had been a damaged place that needed cleaning. Now it felt like a place holding its breath. Marion moved slowly. She cleared the table, folded the blanket, opened the front door for light. Then she laid an old sheet beneath the wall to catch whatever came loose. Dust, rot, maybe nothing, or maybe something Arthur had not known he was giving away. She tied a scarf around her mouth and picked up the small pry bar she had bought from the hardware store. The first board resisted. Marion pressed harder. The wood gave with a damp crack that echoed through the room. She froze. Nothing moved. No animal rushed out. No section of wall collapsed. Just dust drifting through the pale morning light. She pulled the board free and set it down carefully. Behind it was not insulation, not solid framing. Darkness. A narrow space hidden between the studs. Marion's breath caught. She removed another board. This one came loose easier, as if it had been taken off before and put back badly. The opening widened. A smell rose from inside. Not mold this time. Not damp wood. Old metal. Dry paper. A closed-up smell, like a drawer nobody had opened in years. Marion held the lantern close. At first, she saw only shadow. Then a shape appeared at the bottom of the cavity. A box, dark green beneath patches of rust. Small enough to hide, heavy enough, when she reached in and pulled it free, to make her grip tighten. She set it on the table. For a long moment, she only stood there. The shack was silent around her. Even the wind seemed to pause. The box had a lock, but age had eaten through most of it. Marion worked the pry bar beneath the clasp. Her hands shook. Not from fear exactly, but from the strange feeling that her life had reached a door she had not chosen. The lock snapped. The sound was small, but in that room, it felt final. Inside was a folded piece of oilcloth. Marion lifted it back. Beneath it were envelopes tied with string, a stack of old certificates, bank papers, a folded legal document, and one yellowed envelope resting on top. The writing across the front was clear. Arthur. Marion sat down slowly. Her ex-husband's name stared back at her from a box hidden inside the wall of the shack he had thrown away. Not Marion. Not Walter Hale. Arthur. A letter hidden inside a rotting wall, addressed to the very man who had just handed that wall to her, as an insult. For a moment, Marion did not open it. She only held it in both hands. The envelope felt fragile, but the question inside it did not. Why would Arthur's father hide a letter for his own son in a shack nobody was supposed to care about? And why had Arthur never found it? Marion looked toward the broken window, then back at the envelope. For the first time since the divorce, she wondered whether Arthur had thrown away more than a shack. Maybe he had thrown away the one place that knew the truth about him. Marion did not open the envelope right away. She sat at the little table with the lockbox in front of her, listening to the shack settle around her. Morning light came through the broken window in pale strips. Dust moved inside it, slow and weightless. The envelope rested in her hands. Arthur. His name looked different in his father's handwriting. Not polished. Not protected by lawyers. Just a name on yellowed paper, hidden where no one had bothered to look. Marion turned the envelope over. It had never been sealed with glue, only folded closed, as if Walter Hale expected someone to open it one day. That thought made her chest tighten. Walter had been a hard man, quiet, watchful, not warm in the way people usually mean. At family dinners, he had mostly sat at the end of the table, listening more than speaking. Marion used to think he barely noticed her. Now she was not so sure. She unfolded the letter carefully. The paper crackled under her fingers. The first line was simple. Arthur, if you are reading this, then either I waited too long to say it, or you waited too long to listen. Marion stopped. Outside, a crow called from somewhere beyond the trees. She read on. Walter wrote about the early years of Arthur's business, the rented storage unit, the unpaid invoices, the weeks when the company survived only because someone kept the books straight and the creditors calm. He did not name Marion immediately, but she knew. She could see that old kitchen table again. Arthur pacing. Receipts spread across the wood. A baby monitor on the counter. Marion adding numbers while dinner cooled beside her. Then Walter's words changed. You always liked being seen as the builder, son, but no man builds alone, and the woman you married carried more of your weight than you ever had the humility to admit. Marion pressed one hand against her mouth, not because the sentence shocked her, because it recognized her. After months of hearing lawyers shrink her life into numbers, after Arthur made her feel like a guest in the success she helped create, here was a man she thought had barely seen her, writing the truth in ink. She kept reading. Walter said he had watched Arthur become proud, watched him confuse success with superiority, watched him speak over Marion in rooms where she knew more than he did. He wrote that money had a way of revealing people, not changing them. Then came the sentence that made Marion lower the paper to her lap. If you ever cast Marion aside and call her contribution nothing, then what I left in this box should remind you what you took and what you tried to hide. The shack seemed to grow quieter. Marion looked at the lockbox again. The old certificates, the bank envelopes, the folded legal document. Until that moment, she had thought she had found Arthur's family secret. Now she understood something worse. Walter had expected this. Maybe not the exact day. Maybe not the courthouse. Maybe not Tessa waiting in the hallway with perfume and a careful smile. But he had known enough about his son to hide the truth where pride might never look. Marion picked up one of the bank envelopes. Her hands moved slowly now. Inside was a statement from years earlier. Then another. Then a document with Arthur's signature near the bottom. She did not understand every line, but she recognized enough. Dates, transfer amounts, a trust account tied to Walter's estate, a business-linked holding Marion had never heard mentioned during the divorce. One page was newer than the rest, too new to be forgotten history. The date sat only 4 months before Arthur asked for the divorce. Marion read it twice, then a third time. A transfer had been made from one account to another. Arthur's signature approved it. The receiving account was not in the paperwork Claire had shown her in court. Marion felt something cold move through her. Not fear, not exactly. More like the first clear shape of a question she had been too hurt to ask before. Had Arthur simply left her? Or had he planned to leave her poor? She reached for another envelope, This one held old stock certificates, some brittle at the edges, stamped with company names she did not recognize. There was also a folded copy of Walter's will, with handwritten notes in the margin. On one note, Marion saw her own name, not as wife, not as dependent, as witness, as contributor, as someone Walter believed should have been protected. Her eyes blurred then. She let the paper rest on the table and looked around the shack. The cracked mirror, the rusted sink, the broken window taped against the cold. Arthur had given her this place to humiliate her, but his father had hidden something inside it that made humiliation impossible to hold the same way. Because if Walter's letter was true, then Marion had not been left with trash. She had been left with evidence. She folded the letter carefully and placed it back on the table. Then she gathered every document from the box, one by one, and stacked them in neat piles. Old certificates, bank records, legal papers, Walter's letter. By the time she finished, her coffee had gone cold. Marion did not care. She was staring at Arthur's signature again, a signature he had placed months before he ever told her the marriage was over. And for the first time, the question was no longer whether Arthur had betrayed her. The question was how long he had been preparing to get away with it. Marion did not take the papers to Arthur. That was the first decision that changed everything. For 38 years, her instinct had been to bring problems to him first. A bill that looked wrong, a notice from the bank, a customer complaint that arrived at the house by mistake. Arthur handled things. That was what he always said. But standing in that shack, with his signature in front of her and Walter Hale's letter beside it, Marion understood something she should have understood much sooner. Arthur had not handled things. He had hidden them, so she did not call him. She found an old grocery bag under the sink, wrapped the lockbox in a towel, and placed the documents inside a folder from the courthouse. Then she drove back toward Marietta, with both hands tight on the wheel. The road felt different now. Yesterday, it had led to a punishment. Today, it led to an answer. Her first stop was the small credit union on Front Street, a brick building between a pharmacy and a hardware store. She had opened a checking account there after the divorce because the woman at the counter had spoken to her like a person, not a problem. That morning, Marion asked for Samuel Pike. Samuel was semi-retired, with silver hair, careful hands, and the quiet patience of a man who had spent 40 years reading documents people barely understood. He led her to a desk near the back. "What do you need me to look at?" he asked. Marion placed the folder down. "Something I found in an old wall." Samuel did not smile. He only put on his glasses. That helped Marion trust him. People who rushed to react often missed what mattered. He looked at the stock certificates first, un by un. He read the company names, the issue dates, the stamps, the signatures. Some made him nod slightly. Others made him pause. "These may take research," he said. "Some old certificates turn into nothing. Some follow mergers. Some surprise people." Marion waited. Her hands were folded in her lap. Then Samuel opened the bank envelopes. The room seemed to change around him. Not loudly. Nothing dramatic happened. But his shoulders settled differently. His eyes slowed down. He turned one page back, then forward again, as if checking whether the dates said what he thought they said. Mrs. Hale. Marion looked up. "Were these accounts disclosed during your divorce?" "No." "Are you certain?" She almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because after sitting in that courthouse, listening to strangers decide the value of her life, she would never forget what had been listed. "I'm certain." Samuel tapped one page with his finger. "This transfer was made 4 months before the filing." "I saw that." "And this one moved into a trust connected to his father's estate." Marion swallowed. "What does that mean?" Samuel removed his glasses. "It means I'm not the person who should answer that alone." He wrote a name on the back of his business card. "Claire Whitcomb. She has an office above Miller's Pharmacy," he said. "She's not loud, she's not flashy. That's good. Take these to her." Marion reached for the folder. Samuel did not let go right away. "And Marion," it was the first time he used her first name, "do not show these to Arthur. Do not keep the originals in the shack. And do not assume a frightened man will behave like a fair one." The words followed her all the way to Claire Whitcomb's office. The stairs above the pharmacy were narrow. They smelled faintly of dust, coffee, and old wood polish. Claire's name was painted on a frosted glass door in letters that had begun to chip around the edges. Claire was in her late 50s, with dark reading glasses and a face that did not waste expression. She listened without interrupting. Marion told her only what mattered. The divorce, the shack, the wall, the box, the letter. Then Claire read. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Marion watched the attorney sort the papers into small piles across the desk. Old certificates, bank records, trust documents, will copy, Walter's letter. Claire was not shocked. That made the moment heavier. Shock would have passed quickly. This was calculation. Finally, Claire looked up. Where are the originals? With me. After you leave here, they go into a safe deposit box. Not tomorrow, today. Marion's mouth went dry. So they matter. Claire leaned back. They may matter a great deal. She explained it carefully. Not like a lecture, like a map. If Arthur moved marital assets before filing for divorce, if those assets should have been disclosed, if the court relied on incomplete financial statements, then parts of the settlement could be challenged. There could be discovery. There could be sanctions. There could be a revised order. Nothing was guaranteed. Arthur's lawyers would push back hard. They would call the papers old, confusing, misread, irrelevant. They might even say Marion was bitter and trying to punish him. At that, Marion looked down. The old shame rose quickly. Claire noticed. Listen to me, she said. Being hurt does not make you wrong. Marion looked up. Claire pointed to the documents. We follow the paper, not the emotion, not his version, the paper. For the first time in months, Marion felt something steady beneath her fear. Not victory, not yet, but ground. Claire made copies of everything. Samuel helped her open a safe deposit box before closing time. Marion placed the originals inside with both hands, as carefully as if she were setting down something alive. When the metal drawer slid shut, the sound was small, but Marion felt it in her chest. Arthur could not laugh this away. Not easily. Not anymore. That evening, back at the shack, her phone lit up on the table. Arthur's name appeared on the screen. Marion stared at it. One ring, then another, then another. Somehow, he already knew something had changed. Arthur's name stayed on the screen until the ringing stopped. Marion did not touch the phone. She stood beside the table in the dim light of the shack, still wearing the coat she had not taken off since coming back from town. The room was quiet, too quiet. Then the phone rang again. Arthur Hale. For 38 years, that name had trained a response into her body. Answer. Listen. Explain. Smooth things over. But Marion looked at the phone and let it ring. When it stopped, the silence felt different. Not peaceful, not yet. But hers? A minute later, the first message came. Marion, call me. We need to talk. No apology. No question. A command wearing ordinary clothes. She sent it to Claire. The second message came 10 minutes later. Whatever you think you found, those are Hale family documents. You do not understand what you're dealing with. Marion read that one twice. Not because it scared her, because it told her something. Arthur knew enough to be worried. By morning, there were 3 missed calls and another text. We can handle this privately. No need to embarrass everyone. Marion sat at the little table with a cup of coffee between her hands. Everyone. That word almost made her smile. Arthur did not mean everyone. He meant himself. For years, Marion had protected him from embarrassment. She had softened his sharp comments after dinners, covered for his missed birthdays, smiled through awkward moments when he corrected her in front of people who knew less than she did. Now he wanted one last favor. Silence. Claire called before noon. Do not respond, she said. Not directly, not emotionally, not at all unless I tell you. He sounds scared, Marion said. He should be careful, Claire replied. There's a difference. That afternoon, Marion tried to keep working. She swept the porch, carried 2 broken boards to the burn pile, washed the inside of the kitchen window until the glass gave back a little more light. But every sound from the road made her look up. A truck, a branch, a crow landing on the rusted mailbox. Fear is strange when it comes late. It does not always arrive as panic. Sometimes it arrives as listening too hard. Near sunset, a black sedan rolled slowly up the gravel lane. Marion knew the car before it stopped. Arthur stepped out in a dark coat, looking at the shack as if the building had personally insulted him. He glanced at the muddy yard, the patched window, the porch Marion had cleared of leaves. Then he looked at her. She was standing in the doorway, not hiding, not inviting him in, just standing. "You're really living here," he said. Marion kept one hand on the doorframe. "Yes, this place isn't safe. It's safer than it was." Arthur looked irritated by that answer. He took a step closer. "I came because you won't answer your phone. I was advised not to." His jaw tightened. "So now you're taking legal advice from some small-town lawyer?" "She reads papers carefully." That landed harder than Marion expected. Arthur looked away. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The evening air smelled of wet leaves and wood smoke from somewhere far off. The porch light flickered once above Marion's head. Arthur adjusted his coat. "Those documents belonged to my father. They were hidden in a wall of property you gave me. That doesn't make them yours." "No," Marion said, "but it does make me wonder why they were hidden." His eyes came back to her face. There it was, the flash of anger, then caution. He had not expected her to say that. For years, Marion had asked questions softly enough for Arthur to step around them. Now there was nowhere for him to step. He tried a different tone. "Marion, I know you're hurt." The words sounded practiced. "This divorce has been difficult for both of us." She almost laughed then, not loudly, just a small breath through her nose. Arthur heard it. His face changed. "I'm trying to be reasonable," he said. "No," Marion answered. "You're trying to be private." He looked past her into the shack. The table was visible behind her, but the papers were not there. The folder was gone. The box was gone. The originals were locked away in town. For the first time since he arrived, Arthur looked uncertain. "Where are they?" he asked. Marion did not pretend not to understand. "Safe." "With Claire?" "Safe," she repeated. The words seemed to move through him. His shoulders dropped just slightly. Then came the Arthur she remembered, the one who knew how to find guilt and press on it. "Think about the children," he said. "Do you want them dragged through this?" Marion's fingers tightened against the doorframe. He saw it. So he continued. "You start making accusations, and people get hurt. Employees, families, the business, everything we built. Everything we built." That phrase passed between them like a match struck in the dark. Marion looked at him carefully. "You said I didn't build it." Arthur blinked. "In court," she said. "You let them say I had limited contribution. That was legal language." "No, that was convenient language." He stepped closer to the porch. "Fine. You want money? Tell me what number makes this stop." There it was. The truth under the concern. Not the children. Not the business. Not fairness. A price. Marion thought of Claire's voice. "We follow the paper." Not the emotion. Not his version. The paper. "I'm not making a private deal," she said. Arthur's face hardened. "You don't know how ugly this can get." "No," Marion said, "but I know how ugly it already got." The wind moved through the bare trees. Arthur looked at the shack again, and something like disgust crossed his face. Then fear returned. Not big, not dramatic, but visible. "Marion," he said, quieter now, "please." That word stopped everything for a second. Please. He had not used it when he asked her to leave the house. He had not used it when his lawyers erased her life. He had not used it when he handed her the deed like garbage. Now he used it because she had proof. "If this goes forward," he said, "it could ruin me." Marion looked at the man she had spent nearly 4 decades trying to understand, and for the first time, she did not feel responsible for his fear. "I am not ruining you, Arthur." Her voice was calm, almost gentle. "I found what you hid." He stared at her. No answer came, not one that could survive the truth. Marion stepped back into the shack. Then she closed the door. Not hard, not angry, firmly. Arthur stood outside for a long moment. She could see his shadow through the curtain. Then his footsteps crossed the porch. The car door opened. The engine started. And as the sedan backed slowly down the gravel lane, Marion realized something that made her reach for the chair beside her. Arthur had come begging, but the fear in his eyes said the papers had not told the whole story yet. The next morning, Marion woke before the sun, not because she had slept well, Because Arthur's last words had followed her into the dark. It could ruin me. He had said it like she was holding a weapon, but Marion knew better now. She was holding paper. That was all. Paper with dates. Paper with signatures. Paper with numbers Arthur believed she would never understand. And somehow, that made it more powerful. Claire called just after 8. "He came to see you, didn't he?" Marion looked toward the window. The yard was pale with frost. "Yes." "Did you let him in?" "No." "Good." There was a pause. Then Claire said, "Now he knows you won't scare easily. That means his lawyers will try to make the papers look smaller than they are." Marion sat at the table, her coffee untouched. "Can they?" "They can try," Claire said. "But paper has one advantage over people." "What's that?" "It doesn't change its story when it gets nervous." 2 weeks later, Marion sat in a courthouse again. The same county, the same kind of polished hallway, the same smell of floor wax and old paper. But this time, something was different. The first time she came here, she had arrived carrying fear. This time, she carried copies. Claire sat beside her with 3 folders arranged neatly in front of her. No drama, no performance, just tabs, notes, and timelines. Arthur sat across the room with his attorneys. He did not look at Marion. That told her more than a glare would have. The hearing began quietly. Arthur's lawyer spoke first. He called the documents old family records. He said Marion had misunderstood them. He said the trust was separate from the marriage. He said the stock certificates were outdated and possibly worthless. He said the entire matter was being inflated by emotion. Marion felt the old shame rise in her throat. There it was again. Emotion. A word people used when they wanted a woman's evidence to sound like a mood. Claire stood slowly. She did not argue with his tone. She did not perform outrage. She opened the first folder and began with dates. The first transfer happened 7 months before Arthur filed for divorce. The second happened 4 months before. The third was processed through an account tied to Walter Hale's estate, but signed by Arthur. Then Claire placed the earlier divorce disclosure beside the transfer record. One page said, "No such account existed." The other page showed money moving through it. The courtroom became very still. Marion watched Arthur shift in his seat. Not much, just enough. Claire moved to the next folder. Business-linked holdings. Statements never included in the divorce file. Account numbers that matched partial records Arthur's own side had submitted. Then came the stock certificates. Some were old and useless. Claire admitted that before Arthur's lawyers could use it, but others had been traceable. One had followed a chain of mergers into shares that still carried value, not enough to make Marion rich overnight, but enough to prove Arthur's claim of almost nothing available had not been true. Then Claire read one line from Walter Hale's letter. Not the whole thing, just enough. "No man builds alone." Arthur's attorney objected. Claire did not fight over it. She simply said the letter explained why the documents had been preserved together, and why their timing mattered. The judge asked Arthur a question, a simple one. Had these accounts been disclosed during the divorce? Arthur's attorney began to answer. The judge stopped him. "I asked Mr. Hale." For the first time that day, Arthur had to speak for himself. His voice was lower than usual. He said he believed the accounts were not relevant. The judge asked again. That was when Marion saw it. Not victory. Not yet. But a crack. The kind that starts small and runs through the whole wall before anyone can stop it. The order did not come that day. Real life rarely moves that cleanly. There would be further review. More records. More filings. More legal language Marion would need Claire to explain. But something had changed in that courtroom. Arthur's version of the story was no longer the only one with a chair at the table. Weeks later, the decision came. The court found that Arthur had failed to disclose assets that should have been part of the divorce review. The settlement would be revised. Arthur would owe additional payment. He would cover a significant portion of Marion's legal fees. Further financial records would remain open for review. Marion read the order twice. Then she sat down because her legs had gone weak. Not from sadness, not even from joy. From the strange weight of being believed. Arthur's reputation did not collapse in one public explosion. It changed in whispers. A supplier stopped returning his calls as quickly. A banker asked sharper questions. Tessa disappeared from his side before the next hearing. People in town did what people in towns do. They noticed, but Marion did not celebrate his embarrassment. That would have tied her freedom too closely to his fall. Instead, she drove back to the shack with the court order folded on the passenger seat. The same road, the same trees, the same narrow turn near the rusted mailbox. Only this time, when the shack came into view, Marion did not see Arthur's insult first. She saw the porch she had swept, the window she had taped, the wall that had opened, and the door that still stuck, but now opened to something that was finally hers. By sunset, she stood inside the room with the court order in her hand. The shack was quiet. But this time, the quiet did not feel empty. It felt like the beginning of a life Arthur could no longer write for her. The first thing Marion fixed after the court order was not the roof. It was the porch step, the same step that had groaned under her weight the first day she arrived. The same step Arthur had crossed when he came asking for silence. The same step Marion had stood behind when she told him she had found what he hid. It was a small repair. 3 boards, a box of screws, 1 borrowed drill from a neighbor named Lewis Pike, a retired lineman who lived half a mile down the road and spoke in short sentences that somehow never felt rude. He showed Marion how to measure twice, how to brace the wood before fastening it, how to lean her weight into the drill without fighting it. When the step finally held firm beneath her foot, Marion stood on it longer than necessary, not smiling yet, just feeling it. Something that had once threatened to give way beneath her, now held. That became the pattern, not a dramatic transformation, not a miracle renovation. Piece by piece, a roofer patched the worst leak over the stove. Lewis helped her replace the soft floorboards near the sink. Marion painted the front door a deep blue because she was tired of looking at peeling green paint that reminded her of rot. She washed the windows until the light came through clean. She bought 2 clay pots from the hardware store and planted marigolds beside the porch rail. The shack still looked plain from the road, weathered, small, easy to miss if you did not know what had happened there. But inside, it began to feel less like the place Arthur had left behind, and more like the place Marion had chosen to stay. The corrected settlement did not make her careless. That mattered. She did not run out and buy a new life all at once. She paid Claire. She set money aside. She bought a reliable used car with good tires and no strange noise under the hood. Then she made a list. Heat, roof, floor, door lock, savings. Every item checked off felt better than revenge. Revenge burned hot and disappeared. Security stayed. Her daughter, Elise, came on a Saturday afternoon with a casserole wrapped in foil and guilt she did not know how to carry. She stood in the middle of the room, looking at the clean curtains, the repaired wall, the small table, the kettle on the stove. "It's different," Elise said. Marion took the casserole from her hands. "So am I." Elise looked down. For a while, neither of them spoke. Then Elise said the thing Marion did not know she had been waiting to hear. "I thought staying neutral was fair." Marion placed the casserole on the counter. Elise's voice thinned. "But I think maybe neutral only helped Dad." Marion did not rush to comfort her. Some truths need to stand in the room for a moment. Finally, Marion said, "You were trying not to lose either parent." Elise wiped her cheek. "And I almost lost you anyway." That was when Marion reached for her, not because everything was repaired, because a beginning had been offered. Her son, Nolan, came the following week. He did not bring many words. Nolan never had. He brought a toolbox, 2 bags of groceries, and a new porch light. He installed it without making a speech. But before he left, he stood by the blue door and looked at the lock. "This one's solid," he said. Marion nodded. It needed to be. Nolan's jaw moved slightly. Then he hugged her, longer than usual. When he pulled away, his eyes were wet, but he did not explain them. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said. Marion carried those words carefully after he left. Not as proof of her worth. She had learned not to need that from anyone, but as proof that love could still grow in places where silence had done damage. Word traveled in Mill Creek. Not the full story. Marion did not give people every detail. She had learned the difference between privacy and shame. But enough was known. Arthur Hale had left his wife with a shack. She found papers inside. The court made him pay what he had tried to keep. At first, people came with curiosity. Then came the women. A widow from church with a folder of insurance papers she did not understand. A grocery clerk whose husband handled every account. A 70-year-old neighbor whose nephew wanted her to sign something just to make things easier. Marian always said the same thing first. "I'm not a lawyer." Then she made tea. Then she helped them sort what they had. Bank statements in one pile. House papers in another. Names on accounts. Dates. Signatures. Questions to ask before signing anything. The little table where Marian had first opened Walter Hale's letter became a place where other women opened their own envelopes. Some came embarrassed. Some came angry. Some came scared. Marian never made them feel foolish. Shame had already cost women too much. She only told them, "We start with what you have." By winter, the shack had a working heater, a stronger roof, and a porch light that glowed warm against the dark road. One evening, Marian stood outside after helping a woman named Beverly organize 20 years of papers from a marriage she was afraid to question. The marigolds were gone for the season. The trees were bare. The blue door shone softly under the new light. Arthur had given her this place because he thought it would prove she was finished. But every repaired board now said something else. Not loudly. Not for him. For her, this was no longer the shack he left her with. It was the first home Marian had ever owned without asking anyone's permission. On the second anniversary of the divorce, Marian found the deed in the bottom drawer of her small desk. She had not been looking for it. She was sorting old receipts, utility bills, and repair estimates from the first year in the shack. The kind of papers that once would have made her nervous. Now they felt ordinary. Manageable. Hers. The deed was folded inside the same courthouse folder she had carried out under the rain that day. The edges had softened. One corner was bent. Her name was printed near the top. Marian Hale, owner. She sat back in the chair and read that word twice. Owner. The first time she saw it, it had felt like a cruel joke. A legal way of saying Arthur had given her the thing nobody wanted. Now, inside the room she had cleaned, repaired, warmed, and claimed, the word felt different. It felt quiet, solid. True, the shack was not perfect. The floor still dipped slightly near the stove. The windows rattled when winter wind came across the trees. The roof had one stubborn spot that needed checking after heavy rain. But it held. That mattered to Marian. It held heat. It held light. It held laughter now when Elise came over with food and stayed too long at the kitchen table. It held Nolan's quiet footsteps when he stopped by to fix something that did not always need fixing. It held women from town who arrived with folders pressed to their chests and fear hidden behind polite smiles. Women who had spent 30, 40, sometimes 50 years trusting someone else to understand the paperwork. Women who whispered things like, "I don't know whose name is on the account. I signed something years ago. My husband says I don't need to worry about it. My son told me this is just easier." Marian never made them feel small. She knew what that felt like. She knew how shame could keep a woman silent until silence became expensive. So she made tea. She cleared the table. She said the same sentence every time. "We start with what you have. Not what you lost. Not what you should have known. Not what someone made you feel foolish for asking. What you have. A bill. A deed. A bank envelope. A memory of a signature. A question that would not leave you alone." That was enough to begin. Sometimes, after they left, Marian would stand by the wall where the lockbox had been hidden. The wall was smooth now, freshly painted, safe, but she knew what had once been behind it. Paper, ink, proof, and a letter from a hard old man who had seen what his own son refused to honor. For a long time, Marian thought what she found in that wall had saved her because it gave her money. But money was only part of it. Money repaired the roof. Money paid Claire. Money bought the used car with tires that did not shake on the highway. Money let Marian sleep without counting every dollar before the end of the month. But the real thing hidden in that wall was not money. It was confirmation that she had not imagined her own labor, that she had not invented her own importance, that the years she gave had weight, even when Arthur tried to call them nothing. And maybe that was why Arthur's begging no longer lived in her mind the way it once had. At first, she replayed it often. His voice outside the door, his muddy shoes, the fear in his face when she said the originals were safe. But over time, that memory lost its grip. Not because what he did stopped mattering. It mattered. It always would. But his regret was not the center of her life anymore. His fear was not her victory. Her victory was this: a blue door that locked, a porch step that held, a table where other women learned to ask better questions, a life that no longer required her to shrink so a man could feel larger. That evening, Marion carried the deed outside and sat on the porch. The air was cool. The trees had gone dark at the edges. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked once and then went quiet. The porch light Nolan installed glowed above her. Marion looked at the paper in her hands and thought about the day Arthur gave it to her. He thought he was handing her an ending, a place to disappear, a place to be ashamed, a place that proved she had been left with nothing. But Arthur had been wrong about the shack, wrong about his father, wrong about the wall. Most of all, he had been wrong about Marion, because the woman he expected to break had learned how to stand still long enough to hear the hollow place. Then open it, then face what came out. She folded the deed carefully and held it against her lap. For the first time in years, Marion did not feel like someone waiting to be chosen, forgiven, protected, or explained. She felt present, rooted, enough. And as the porch held beneath her feet, she understood the truth that had taken 64 years, one divorce, one broken shack, and one hidden box to finally reach her. Sometimes people leave you with what they think is worthless because they never had the wisdom to see what it could become in the right hands. And sometimes the thing they use to humiliate you becomes the very place where your life begins again. If Marion's story moved you, give this video a like and subscribe for more stories about people who were counted out too soon. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you found the papers Marion found?